Let's talk about Dehancer Pro. Dehancer is a plugin that allows you to emulate the looks of your favorite films with their extensive library. I'm no film geek nor expert, so I can't give you information on each individual stock. But if you play around and experiment within the plugin itself, I'm sure you'll be able to achieve very interesting looks. Before I talk about how I grade my footage, I think it's important to know that I'm not a pro colorist. I usually work in a run and gun setup where I do most of the filming and editing myself. Now that you know my workflow, I think it's important to know that my techniques may be technically flawed, but at the end of the day, all I'm working towards is achieving an aesthetically pleasing image. So I'll be using all these clips here to highlight different features within the plugin itself. Dehancer usually recommends adjusting your primaries before you put in the plugin itself, and that's what I've done here with my own look tree, which I've been working with even before I started using Dehancer. Where I have Dehancer applied is under the looks panel. Previously, what I do is just apply split toning over here, but since Dehancer has so many features that allow me to get a very good looking image after adjusting all my primaries. First step in my workflow would be to apply a color space transform. And you can do it two ways. For me, I prefer using DaVinci's default color space transform tool, which will look something like this. But if you prefer using the Dehancer's one, it will look something like this. Okay, so you can compare the difference here. Okay, so this is mine, and this is the Dehancer one. To apply the color space transform on Dehancer itself, you go to input and then you apply all the settings that fit your requirement. I shot this with a Sony A7 IV ISO 800, so I have all these applied. So this gives me a good layer to start working with. Okay, but since I like to use DaVinci's one, I'll use it as such. Once I've applied my color space transform, I'll go ahead and adjust all my primaries. So white balance, pre-exposure, saturation, and contrast. So this is what I have at the end. You can see the difference once I turn on this node. So this is the image that I ended up with. I was going for something more warm, a little bit of an evening glow kind of vibe, so you can tell the difference if I turn on and off. In this case, since I used DaVinci's color space transform, my source here will say Rec 709. After I've done this, I will go to my film section or my print section and apply a look. So in this case, I've applied Kodak Ekta expired 1996, but there's so many options that you can choose from. So just play around and I think you'll find something that you like. If you don't like the film profiles, you can also go to your print profiles. So in this case, let me enable them. You can go for, if you like a print look, you can go for something like this, or like this, or like this. Oops. Or you can go for a film look, kind of soft look. This is how I set up my image to be. Once I've applied the general look, I need to do some fine tuning to the image. That's when I open up input and expand. So in some images, I need to adjust the exposure, temperature, and tint to tune it towards the look that I want to go for. This image here, that's what I did. You can tell there's so much difference once I've applied this fine tuning right here. So the image already looks good itself, but maybe you might want to do a bit of fine tuning. So that's when you apply sections in the input and expand panel. For the expand panel itself, what I use to guide me is the scopes. So typically, under the contrast panel, I'll turn on editable splines, which allows me to have better control of my curves, and I'll lift up the shadows and the highlights a bit. So if you take a look at my scopes right here, I've set a upper and lower limit, and that's usually where I want my image to hit, to have a well-balanced contrast. But you can tell that overall levels are all centered. What I'll do is I'll go to expand, and I'll just push the white points till it hits the top, and then I'll push the black points till it hits the bottom. So once you've adjusted your black and white points, sometimes you might feel like it's too strong in certain areas. So that's when I'll go to monitor and I'll turn on this clipping indication, which is so helpful for me, so I can tell which parts of my image are clipping. Two ways to go about it. Either A, I go back to expand or bring it back down like this. Then I'll end up with a softer image, or I leave it as such and I go back to my contrast panel, what I might do is I raise the shadows a little bit more to give it a bit more fade. I reduce the black contrast, and then maybe I'll push the panel here a bit. Yeah, so I feel like this looks a little bit more natural and it gives a brighter look to the image. So to reiterate my points, first apply a color space transform, then apply a looks through film and print, depending on which one you want. Then do some minor adjustments through the input panel, film development panel, and your expand panel. Then to tell whether your image is clipping or not, go to monitor and turn on clipping indication. So in this case, you can see that I'm still bursting a bit. So maybe what I'll do is go back to my expand panel and then I'll bring down my whites, just so it's touching ever so slightly. So this is the before, this is the after. You can tell the difference. And once I turn off the Dehancer plugin itself, you can see how much difference it makes to the image, right? I love Dehancer so much because it allows me to get a good looking image without playing with so much of the split toning. Because I myself, I'm not really that experienced with split toning. So sometimes I feel like I'd overdo certain colors. Having Dehancer itself allows me to get a good looking image easily, which suits my current workflow. Now I want to showcase this feature called film compression. Now I'll use this image here. This image was shot during sunset, shot directly against the sun. So you have a very, very strong highlight here. But you can tell from this grid that all the details here are retained. You got a very soft, smooth looking image. And it's all thanks to this feature, which is film compression. The magic comes when I turn this off. You can see a major difference. Look at how blown out the image is. You know, some people have a preference where they prefer very bright highlights, but for me, I'm the opposite. I like very soft looking highlights. So that's where film compression comes in handy. There are 4 components: impact, white point, tonal range, and color density. Color density, while it's not saturation, it technically works as saturation. So if I push it to the end, you can see that all the orange and the blue is boosted, but I don't need that right now. So I set it as the default. Alternatively, you could also push it to the other end. You can see that it takes away some of the orange in the sky as well as the blues in the sky, but I'll just leave it as what it is right now. So impact is essentially like your gain, 100% or 0%, right? 0 means you have like almost nothing applied. 100 means you have the whole effect applied. The 2 key parts that affect this the most is white point and tonal range. So white point essentially is how much of the whites you want to affect, right? So you can see that maybe I only want a little bit of the whites, maybe I want majority of the whites. So because this was shot directly in the sun, I wanted the whole image to be flatter. So I just pushed it to the max. And for tonal range, it's how much detail you want to remain in the sky or in the parts that are blown out. So if I put it to 0, you can see that there's not much detail, but once I push it to 100, you can see the separation in the skies and the clouds. You can see the separation between the different highlights and the roll-off. So it gives a very good looking image. And I've applied film compression to almost all my images because I don't like very bright shadows. So I think in the previous image that I've edited, I have film compression enabled too. So if I turn it on and off, you can see the difference. This is on, this is off. And because I have clipping indication turned on under the monitor, you can see that when I don't have film compression turned on, I have certain parts of my images clipping. So film compression is really good at keeping your highlights down and ensuring that your highlights aren't blown out, unclipped. And if you like that soft highlight look, you can apply this to your image. So for me, this is the winner right here. I really love this feature. Another feature that people might like is the bloom feature. So the bloom feature essentially works as like a pro mist filter. I already have one applied. That's why you can see there's some smooth highlight roll off here. But if you're going for a specific look, let's say you're going for like a 70s, 80s kind of like glowy effect, you can just go ham on the bloom. So if I turn it on, okay, you can see immediately that there's some glossy effect right here. But if you want to go crazier, you can go to custom and you can play with all these different settings. The most obvious one will be impact. So if I push it to 100, you can see this whole part becomes like a tub of Vaseline, right? So depending on the look that you were trying to achieve, you can do a lot with the bloom panel. And I love this a lot because sometimes I'm not shooting with the Pro Mist filter itself, and having this bloom effect allows me to nitpick on the certain areas that I want bloom to be applied. Film grain is quite explanatory. It just allows you to have some nice textures in your image. So if I turn this off and I turn it on, you can tell there's so much difference. I think the film grain gives a lot of character to this image, especially since this image was shot in Taiwan when the cloud was passing through the mountain. So you can see this very misty effect. So having the grain adds that grit to the image, which I like a lot. But if you want different types of grains, they have so many different default presets that you can play with, or you can do it custom yourself. So just play around and you will get a grain that you enjoy. But for me, what I was using just now was perfect. I like the look of halation on a lot of my images, especially images where there are very bright light sources, like night shots, when there are so many different lights just like seeping into the scene. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different light sources here, and adding halation to this image will make it a lot more interesting. So I'll show you an example right now. So if I want something very simple, I'll just turn it on, the default one, which is the Super 35 one. Maybe you can't tell much difference right now. But if I want something stronger, I can go for the one with no remnant. So you can see instantly there was more bloom here, more halation. And if I want to go even stronger, I can go to custom and I can boost everything up. You can see that originally it was blue. Now we have such a strong halation to the image, and now I've overdone it a bit. Some people might like this look, but I think it's a bit too strong. So once you play around the different settings, you can achieve something that you like. So going back to what I want, this is good enough for me. I also like to use Vignette a lot. Sometimes I don't even turn on my Vignette node. I just do the vignetting all within the panel itself. So in this case, I've already have it enabled here. You can see the difference in the corners. It's pretty self-explanatory when it comes to the panels. You just need to play around with the settings, put them to the different extremes, and you can see how it's affecting your image. Here are my final thoughts. As someone who operates on a run and gun basis, I find Dehancer to be especially useful because it allows me to achieve an aesthetically pleasing image instantaneously. And I think that's really, really helpful, especially when you're doing most of the things by yourself. I'm not paid to say any of this. The folks over at Dehancer have been kind enough to send me the plugin to try and give my honest opinion on it. And safe to say, I really enjoy using it, and I would definitely integrate it into my current workflow. If you have the money, I definitely recommend that you try out Dehancer and make sure you use my promo code to get a discount off your purchase.